All right, welcome everyone to another episode of Working People, a podcast about the lives, jobs, dreams, and struggles of the working class today. Brought to you in partnership with In These Times magazine and the Real News Network, produced by Jules Taylor, and supported entirely by listeners like you. Working People is a proud member of the Labor Radio Podcast Network. So if you're hungry for more worker and labor-focused podcasts and radio shows like ours, then follow the link in the show notes and definitely go check out the other great shows in our network. And, if you want to support the work that we're doing here at Working People, so that we can keep growing and keep bringing you more important conversations, please leave us a positive review on Apple Podcasts. Share these episodes on your social media and with your coworkers and friends and family members. And of course, the best thing that you can do to support the show is become a paid monthly subscriber on Patreon for just $5 a month. Just go to patreon.com/workingpeople. That's patreon.com/workingpeople. Smash that subscribe button, and you'll immediately get access to all of the awesome bonus episodes that we've recorded and published over the years for our amazing subscribers. My name is Maximilian Alvarez, and I will try to keep things nice and short here. Truth be told, this has been an exceedingly busy and frankly stressful month for both me and Jules. And in spite of all that, I am proud that we put out all the important episodes that we've done this month. We talked about COVID spikes and the incredible stress that teachers like Casey Scully have been enduring with schools going back to in-person learning. We covered the ongoing strike by distillery workers in Kentucky who still need our support. Of course, we had what I think is one of the most important episodes that we've ever done, where I spoke with the family of Evan Seyfried, who described how Evan, a longtime Kroger worker in Ohio, was bullied and harassed into suicide. And we released, an important panel discussion last week, giving y'all a breakdown of an important struggle in rural Wisconsin, where local farming communities are fighting with everything they've got against big agriculture and the factory farming industry. On top of that, we've got a lot of balls in the air right now, a lot of plates spinning on important worker stories that we will be covering here on the podcast and over at the Real News Network, where I work. So definitely be on the lookout for coverage from us on, say, the upcoming strike vote with IATSE. That is the International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees, Moving Picture Technicians, Artists, and Allied Crafts. Basically, the people who make Hollywood happen are about to have a pretty historic and pretty significant strike authorization votes, so definitely keep your eyes peeled for that, and we are going to be trying to bring y'all some coverage on that and talk to workers there. We are also working to cover farm worker struggles in California, a crucial referendum next month with the United Auto Workers, and of course, more one-on-one worker interviews that are the bread and butter of everything we do here at Working People. So all of that is in the works, and we cannot wait to share it with y'all. But I guess my point is that, we're doing our best, even with a tremendous amount of shit going on at work and in our personal lives. And, but even so, it's been hard to keep up, and we are sorry for falling behind on bonus episodes this month. We're going to be doubling the number of bonus episodes that we normally publish next month so that we can make up for that deficit and show our amazing subscribers lots of love and bring y'all lots more great conversations. So that is a promise. What would be, perfect is if I could pay someone to help me book all these working people episodes and keep track of all the bookings as I balance them with all my real news work. But to do that, we need more money on Patreon. And to get more money on Patreon, we need to put out more bonus episodes to draw in more subscribers. So therein lies the perpetual struggle. So anyway, the point is, this month has been bonkers, and we're going to smooth things out and crank out more great public episodes and more bonus episodes for y'all in October. All right. Well, on that note, let's get to today's episode. So, as I mentioned earlier, those of you who listened to our episode last week will have gotten a breakdown and a crucial update on an important story in rural Wisconsin that I got to report on over the summer for the Real News Network and the amazing In These Times magazine. It's a story about factory farming, from agriculture to meat production, just gobbling up all that's left of the farming industry in the U.S. and increasingly around the world. But it's also a story about, pretty politically diverse coalitions of farmers, community members, and environmental advocates who are banding together and fighting back, fighting to defend their ways of life and their property, fighting to protect the land, air, and water from the incredible destruction that factory farming is doing, fighting to keep what's left of the independent farming economy alive. And, this is something that we all need to care about because it truly does impact all of us. From, the meat and produce that we buy to the very air that we breathe and the water that we drink. This issue is already affecting you, even if you don't realize it yet. And it sure as hell is affecting folks in rural areas like Crawford, Polk, and Burnett counties in western Wisconsin. And that's where I went this summer. And that's who I talked to. If you haven't already, definitely listen to last week's episode on the podcast and go watch the documentary report that we produced for the Real News and In These Times, which we have linked to in the show notes here. Those, I think, will give you a really solid grounding for everything that we talk about in today's episode. But I think, there's also a lot in today's episode that, you don't need to have that background for, but I think it'll just give you really helpful context. What you're about to hear, though, is one of the sit-down interviews that I did while I was in Wisconsin with Kristy Lynn Allen, a beekeeper and farmer in Burnett County. She's also the founder of the Beez Kneez, which produces lots of amazing honey products. I got to try some myself. And she serves as president of the local chapter of the Wisconsin Farmers Union. Kristy and her partner are literally at ground zero of this struggle. I walked all around their property, and I saw all the ways that their farm and the surrounding area are going to be impacted by the massive 26,000 hog factory that is slated to be built near there if the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources rubber stamps the permit. Especially for folks like me who don't live in rural areas, it's just so hard to sum up the damage that the industrialization of farming has done to agriculture in general, and the damage that these massive animal factories would do specifically to farmers like Kristy. This is her story.
So my name is Kristy Lynn Allen. I live in Grantsburg, Wisconsin on Trade River Ranch Farm. I'm a professional beekeeper that runs a business called the Beez Kneez. I'm originally from Minnesota. My partner and I moved here in 2017. Before that, I had started a business in Minneapolis in 2010 called the Beez Kneez. And my goal since starting the business was to move out to the country and farm. And so ever since then, I've been working towards that goal to find a piece of land that I could call my own and to do the work of beekeeping and spreading the good word about bees and making honey. I worked, my first job on a farm out here was in Osceola, which is in Polk County, not too terribly far, and connected by the St. Croix. So we are in the St. Croix River Valley, which is a really special place. And one of the main reasons we bought this farm was for the Trade River that runs through our property and into the St. Croix. Kyle and I were recently married, and we were looking for a house to buy, our very first house, and we looked at this property. It was a private sale, and it was all it took. We have 30 acres. It's down in kind of a little valley surrounded by wetlands and the Trade River. And so when we moved out here, we had no idea that the hog factory was even on the table. It was, I think, the following spring or the spring after that where we found out a man named Jeff Sauer had come to our neighboring town meeting and proposed this idea. And our neighbor, which we didn't know at the time, Jim Moline, who owns some of the land near us, but also farms a lot of it around us, accepted a purchase agreement with the company. And so that's when it really started. The way we grow food is really having an incredible impact on honeybees. And so I come from a lens of wanting to protect a very crucial species that makes honey, which is an incredible thing, but also pollinates a lot of our food. And so I am focused on sustainable farming as the future of farming for many reasons. Climate change is upon us. We're entering a drought here in the Midwest and a lot of places around the country. And the CAFO issue was always something that was, of course, in the periphery of my world. I was more focused on large-scale industrial-style farming in the way that it impacted bees. But this is just the next level of that kind of farming with livestock. So it's really alarming, the sheer number of hogs that this particular factory is trying to produce, and it's just the beginning in an area that really would be negatively impacted. Every area would be negatively impacted by it, but being at ground zero of where the manure and the carcasses would be spread, it's become very real for us. And as first-time homeowners, land owners, we have an incredible amount to lose. Everybody does. But again, our personal story is we just invested 4 years into making this space, bringing it back to life. When we moved here, there was 9-foot tall burdock. You couldn't walk anywhere around.
And I mean, you weren't kidding, right? When you said that you and your partner came out here, you saw the property and you were sold, right? I mean, you've been kind enough to show us around the property. It's gorgeous. You have a river running through the property, that looks like something straight out of, Thoreau, right? Like it looks like Walden Pond or something even more idyllic, right? You got chickens and running around here. You got your bee keeping operation here. I wanted to ask if you could tell me a little bit more about the farm itself, what y'all do here. Tell us about the honey operation, and I guess just give folks watching this like a little more sense of the place where we're sitting.
Yeah. So the property is a mix. There's about, I'd say, 5 to 6 acres of pasture, and then the rest of it is woods, the river, and a little bit of prairie. So we have a mix of kind of a lot of different landscapes, and you can actually feel the temperature change when you come down the hill. And so there's like our own little ecosystem as well. In fact, our neighbors will come over and they'll look at these giant oak trees and they're just astounded because a lot of the oak trees around here have disappeared due to firewood and things like that. But it's a really, really great place for bees. I've been keeping bees over the winter here for the last 4 years, and almost every year they all survive, which is pretty amazing since, the average loss is 50 to 60 or 40 to 50% in the winter time. And I've had 100% of my hives survive in this area. So it's a really great place for bees. We have so much nature around us. The sandhill crane migration, last year there were 10,000 birds. And I'm not joking, it was so loud it was like a concert flying overhead. Trumpeter swans, bobcat. Just the nature out here is incredible. And we grow all our own food for as much as we can, and can it and save it. And my operation is pretty well known in Minneapolis. I invented a pedal-powered honey extractor, and I also did, in 2014 and 15, a lot of advocacy work to protect bees after some pesticide kills on our honeybees. And so when I moved my business out of the city, it was kind of a big deal for those communities that knew us well and helped us grow over the years. But moving out here and meeting a lot of the local farmers, I now keep bees on a lot of sustainable farmers that are out here. In this area, people don't realize it's kind of like the best kept secret, but we need it to not be a secret anymore, to show folks just how valuable the natural capital is, but also the amount of money that the local sustainable farmers are contributing, not to mention the food that they produce. So I have the privilege of working with these farmers in my network, putting the bees there, and then I get to see the things that they're doing. And that's the future of farming, in my opinion. They're doing things to mitigate soil erosion, climate change, and their manure management is usually used with plants that fix nitrogen. They do apply compost, but in a way that they understand that they need the water clean, right? And we can't, as farmers, operate sustainable farmers, small-scale farmers, local farmers, if something that behemoth of a factory producing that much waste moves in, we won't be able to farm. And so it's interesting when you think about this right to farm law in Wisconsin and who has the right to farm and who doesn't. But this particular place, every time people come here, and we just held an event, I'm the president of the Wisconsin Farmers Union chapter, and everyone who comes here is like, this is a really special place. Like, you can just feel how different it is and how beautiful we are surrounded by it, yeah.
Well, and speaking of, what makes this area so special, right, is, we know in Burnett County and Polk County, right, there is, still a robust and sustainable kind of local independent farming economy here. We were just interviewing, a neighboring farm, Lisa Dorr and her husband. They sell hay to kind of local small scale protein producers, right? People who are farming pigs and so on and so forth. And your partner was producing sausages, you're making honey products, and, that's always kind of like what we're told, especially in the cities, that we are supposed to fight for and preserve, right? Is that sort of independent family farm economy. It's something that I think most people love and appreciate and want. But I think that the vast amount of people, myself included, before we really started investigating this story, probably don't know how destructive and destabilizing these CAFO operations are to what remains of those local farming economies. So I guess could you tell us a little bit more about that economy here in Burnett County, how y'all are kind of plugged into it, and what the CAFO would mean for that economy?
Yeah, so I'm still learning the intricacies of it, but I can tell you that the local farms that I work with are really focused on trying to get more clients and customers out here. And I will tell you, my 4 years out here, I have met so many people who have recently moved out here as well. And I think they're moving out here for a lot of the same reasons that I am, in that it has that beauty and natural capital, but also the access to these sustainable farmers. And they serve the Twin Cities market, but we are actively working with our local community to get a lot more of that economy out here. As far as how a company or a factory like that would impact us as farmers, if our water is so high in nitrates that we can't drink it, think about what our animals would be drinking, or what we would have to do in raising a small herd of goats, or raising, even I work with grass-fed pig and beef producers, and they, the disease transfer for that amount of pigs, not to mention the infrastructure needed to process that many pigs. When COVID hit, a lot of these smaller producers had a really hard time getting their animals butchered and processed for market because there was such a bottleneck. And these bigger farms, in a situation like that, would not help the situation at all. Unless they build their own their own processing plants, which we know are dangerous, hard on workers, mostly immigrant labor that's underpaid. And during the COVID crisis, many people got sick and people died because they're working in these small, close quarters. And there might be, so the argument out here from other farmers, like my neighbor, Jim Moline, would be that the corn prices are going to go up and that they're going to benefit from that. And while they might see a small bump at first, over time, how long is that going to last next to the international commodity market of corn and soybeans? And not to mention that people aren't going to want to move out here and live out here if their property values are going to drop 80%, 50, 60, depending on how close you are to these facilities. And so a farmer like myself, who, I'm 40 this year, and in 20 years, will I be able to retire in the way that most Americans do? They have value in their land or in their properties. And then if we don't have clean water, or you can't step outside because it smells so horrible from the spreading of that manure. So it has a lot of impacts. And I think that we really want to strengthen that local economy, and the people who are making the decisions or are neglecting to make decisions to protect us, are being sold a narrative that the future of farming are these factories. And my question about that narrative is, so are we all to live in cities and then the rural areas are just these giant Walmart supercenter sized factories of animals? I just don't think many people want that future or realize that that's where this is headed.
Right. And I mean, you can see it, sadly, kind of all over the landscape here, right? Even with us kind of driving up through Wisconsin, up here to the northwestern corner, it's like you see how much the kind of economic opportunities in rural areas have been hollowed out through these types of processes. And what do you have to replace them, right? What pathways do working people in these areas have for building a comfortable, dignified life, let alone like have the prospect of retirement? More and more, the only opportunities that are available are not really working for yourself on an independent farm, but being an employee of a big ag company or a factory farm or a hog factory or some other type of dairy CAFO, turkey CAFO, what have you. Or the other feature of the landscape is prisons, right? So you get a lot of prisons, you get a lot of factory farms. Those are like the kind of like economic opportunity drivers that are kind of cropping up in rural areas around the country.
Yeah, and what I've learned through this fight is the way that people take advantage of these small towns, that main streets in the small towns have been stripped because of farming laws that have been pushing the smaller farmer out, right? So you used to have these kind of vibrant, smaller, you can see these cute, quaint towns around rural Wisconsin that our storefronts are empty. There's really not much going on in like the downtown area because dairy farmers largely who used to be able to have a small herd of cows, like 40, 50, 60, and then send their kids to college and things like that. Kids aren't coming back because that future no longer exists. They might even want to be on the farm again when they're older, and it's just not an appealing thing if you can't make any money and you work really, really hard. I mean, farming is hard, but it's also could be supported in a way that would make it a viable income. And I would argue a lot of the sustainable farmers I work with, compared to large scale commodity farmers, are in way less debt. I mean, they're not spending $500,000 on tractors and whatever it takes to do that kind of agriculture. In driving around, have you seen the tractors around here lately? They have to climb a ladder to get up in them.
Right. I mean, and
it's expensive and puts you into a lot of debt.
It does. And I mean, in a past life, I remember when I was writing for a magazine called The Baffler, I reported on the kind of right to repair movement, right? And so I did notice when we were driving up here, right, you have kind of occasionally dotted along the highway, these sort of, big, like, John Deere, tractor and combine, sales lots. And I think what, I tried to kind of get people to understand back then, not that this issue has gone away, is that, I've talked to farmers who would tell me it's like, I use my tractor from the 70s because if that thing breaks down, I can still fix it.
Right.
But now if I get this new fancy John Deere tractor or, some other model that I have to, use a ladder to climb into, it's got all these like bells and whistles, all these computer chips. If something breaks there, I have to basically either learn how to hack my own equipment to fix it, or I have to get a flatbed out here, load up this tractor, take it to an approved dealership where they have someone who can actually fix the computer system,
right,
and then bring it back. So that costs money. Every day that the tractor's not in operation is money lost, especially during harvest season. And so, you start to see just, again, how stacked the deck is against anyone who, doesn't have the resources that like a big ag company would have.
Yeah. And when I see a piece of equipment like that, especially with the big arm sprayers on the side, as a beekeeper, I get really nervous. I mean, that means killing a lot of pollinators. That means I have to worry about my bees getting sick in the middle of the summer. That means that those crops require an intensive amount of manure and an intensive amount of pesticides in order to make them grow. And that model of farming, it doesn't work. It doesn't work for the farmer, and it's a system that is unsustainable. And earlier I mentioned that we could be on our way to a historic drought like the one in the 1930s. And if you study agriculture, the Dust Bowl was a really terrible experience to have. And if you plant a lot of one crop, what are your options, right? What's the backup plan when that crop fails? Same thing goes if you put 26,000 pigs in one area and they all get African swine fever. Where do all those carcasses go? What happens to that disease? I mean, there's just like so many reasons not to put all your eggs in one basket like that. And the model of farming that is thinking about clean water, because they know they need clean water in the future, and cover cropping and things like that is a forward thinking kind of farming that used to be a lot more common. And I really, one thing that makes me the most upset about when I'm fighting this issue is this idea of what is the future and who's deciding what that future is. That future only includes people that live other places that are making decisions based on spreadsheets. And if you go to China or you look at the companies that are ultimately at the very end of this food chain now, go over there and see what their rural areas look like and what their pig production I mean, the reason they're coming over here is because they have had incredible problems with disease and African swine flu. And so they're trying to go to places that they can do that quantity without having that same pandemic style thing happen to their livestock.
Right. I mean, I think, and I know that that's one of the kind of issues that's really kind of galvanized the community out here, right? The longer this fight has gone on, the more apparent it's become, like, how many outside kind of actors are invested in this fight, right? It's not as simple as, like, a local community is discussing whether or not to allow a large scale kind of hog facility in the county. No, it's in fact, you know, the hog CAFO that has been proposed for Burnett County, all of the hogs that would like kind of be slaughtered, all the products from that, they would be shipped off to China, right? And you know, also folks in this community have learned that you know, a lot of their ability to sort of have any sort of local control over the decision making, any sort of say over what happens to their land, water, air, and their community as such has kind of been stripped away by the legislature, by lobbying groups, and so on and so forth. So it's it may seem like kind of a local issue, but there are a lot of interceding kind of like parties that have a vested interest in ramming this thing through and shutting up the local community. Yeah.
So since we started being aware, and I want to say it's been at least 2 years, if not a little longer than that, since the idea came to the area, and being new to the area, and Wisconsin small town politics, I was, pretty shocked at just how corrupt it can be, or the people who are aimed to benefit. For example, the companies come out here and they send someone who it's questionable this particular person or representative even works for Smithfield or, you know, the company. There's no evidence that he actually works for them. So they contract people probably to come out here and find a local farmer who is in a lot of debt, has some land, and they will offer $1 million for a 40-acre plot so that they can make many more millions to that, right? So what has happened in what I can see from being a little bit of a newbie is, you know, people in this area who are farmers who it's hard and they've been struggling for a long time based on commodity prices fluctuating, things with climate change, whether they'll admit that that's what it is or not. You know, they get put up against a wall, and they've been going and knocking on doors and looking for vulnerable people who want to retire or, you know, or want to be financially comfortable. And I can totally sympathize with that occasion. But when it involves something that is going to really destroy, and we have examples of this in North Carolina, in Iowa, where these places go up and people can't drink their water. They can't go outside. So, in building my new honey house on my property, we dug down and the water table was really, it's like 18 inches down, or in some areas, 3 feet in others. It's not very low for manure spreading to end up in your water, in your wells. Our neighbor has a 15-foot well. And I've noticed that this particular person, Jim Moline, has burned a lot of bridges with his neighbors, because why would you do that? How is that neighborly? And it isn't. It's very self-serving to convince, even as a town politician, to convince all your constituents that this is the right thing for the town. And it got so bad that he had to recuse himself from any conversations on the CAFO. He eventually had to step down as town chair, and then the town filed a civil lawsuit against him. So what does that tell you about the operation? There's a lot of opposition. The local community does not want it. But there are very powerful special interests that, the National Pork Association and even the National Dairy, but they don't represent the day-to-day farmers. They represent the industry, and they don't live out here. So we would, I don't think people really realize how severe it would be. And once it starts, and we know this from other places, it's incredibly hard to stop. So there's been some really, the positive thing I've taken out of it is it's forced me into a fast track of getting to know my neighbors around this issue, organizing letter writing campaigns to the county, where I, worked with the neighbors to write 12 letters, which doesn't sound like a lot, but we're pretty spread out here. So, and the county just throwing its hands up and being like, no, there's nothing we can do. They're going to come anyway. And this defeatist mentality of we can't stop it. So the new mentality is to create ordinances that make it, that hopefully if something bad were to happen, which it will, that you can take it to court and sue. But these companies have so much money, and so even if you get to that point, the damage is already done. But I guess it's not here yet. The permit is pending. A lot of us are very activated. It's one of the reasons that I joined the Wisconsin Farmers Union, was to be part of a farming organization that they have common sense policies that protect farmers or are working for farmers. And one of their main goals is to break up big ag in a way that will support small family farms again. And I was inspired by that. Not to mention that they were, this same company went to Bayfield, which is north of us, about, 60, 70 miles, maybe more than that. And the town and the area was so resistant to it that the company, they pulled the permit out and they gave up and they moved down here and found someone like Jim Moline that they could get to strike a deal with. And I think there are, auxiliary parts to it as well that, for example, I was at a town meeting and this young couple had just moved out here, and I think probably were just learning about this for the first time, but they came to the town meeting to ask, is there anything we can do about these loud trucks that drive by our place at night? And this is just, the silage trucks, the harvesting trucks, or, whatever they're using for big corn and soy farmers. And that's nothing compared to the amount of truck traffic. I mean, they would be pumping out manure and spreading it on the field. So you have manure trucks, which large tankers, right? Destroying the roads. I mean, these towns don't have a lot of money. And so roads is like mainly what what gets talked about at meetings. So that alone, just think about trying to deal with the destruction of roads and the traffic and the smell from those vehicles. The smell, and this is something that is really, we can get baseline water data and say, like, our water was really clean. I just pulled out, we had to have our water tested when we moved in. Our water's incredibly clean. But you can't, it's harder to quantify the air quality. And, these factories, the closer you are to them, they're known to cause cancer. And that what you're breathing in are toxic fumes coming from housing that many animals. And they're sucking air out of the facilities to keep the animals from getting sick. But where is that going?
Right. And I mean, a lot of studies have suggested, you mentioned COVID-19. We're at the tail end of, a deadly pandemic, that wrought so much destruction on this country. And that is by no means over, right? Millions of people in India and Brazil and around the world are dying. Countries in the global north are hoarding vaccines. The nightmare is ongoing, right? And I say all that, not to kind of inject kind of a political narrative here, but to really highlight the fact that studies are showing that, most likely the next zoonotic disease on the level of COVID-19 or even worse is probably going to come out of a factory farm like this, right? And so, we're not just trying to kind of be doom and gloom here. We're trying to say it's like, this is like the reality of what these facilities are.
Right.
When you house that many live bodies in those close of quarters. Most of these hogs never even see the light of day in their entire lifetime.
Yeah, if these were human beings, think about the sewage system that would be required to take care of all the waste from 26,000 people on a 40-acre plot of land. I mean, that's like, when you think about it. And hogs and humans aren't terribly different in their DNAs, so it's not a big stretch to make that comparison. And the disease transfer, there is nothing about it that is positive. The only thing that is again, a few people are going to make some money, and that's the positive part. And I want to address a narrative that they always talk about, and big agriculture has always said this, the reason we have to do this kind of agriculture is we're feeding the world, right? Okay, so if we're feeding the world, and that's like our humble contribution, but at the same time, we're not feeding our own population. We're making them sick. We're contaminating the water to feed people that a lot of people share politics don't really care about other members of the world. And that's just, my own personal view on it. But it makes me crazy that you would make people heroes because they're going to make a couple $1 million to quote unquote feed the world. The heroes to me are the ones that are trying really hard to do things in a way that feed people, but also, like, we have to live with nature or it's not going to feed us anymore. It will destroy us, and it's already doing so. There are examples all over the place of how we are taking things out of balance and it is rearing its head. And you see this with bees because they don't have borders. They fly, 8,000 miles circumference, and they're going to encounter stuff that is messing with the balance of our ecosystems.
Right. And it's like, by the time it gets so severe that people are activated to do something about it,
it's too late.
It will have been too late.
Yeah. And that's the hard part of a lot of the issues, right? I mean, we are fighting so many issues around water quality, water access. This will be, I think, in the future, the thing that wars get more intense. I mean, they already are in certain parts of the world. If you connect it to climate change, drought, and then you see places in Africa where there's sectarian violence and civil wars breaking out. And is that because they hate each other? I don't think so. It's resource-based, which turns into political power, greed, and then how do you maintain that? And when you have secretaries of agriculture that say get big and get out, and they go back to a mentality of corporate versus everybody else, that's why we end up in these situations. And this isn't, like you said, this is already happening. This is a big alarm, and I don't know how to communicate to folks strongly enough like that. We have to stop this. There is no future of farming or food in this model. It will make us all sick first.
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, I honestly do think about this quite a lot. It keeps me up at night, right? Especially, again, after what we saw how we saw the world respond to COVID-19. And what I just described as like kind of this harried rush by wealthier nations to hoard as much of life-saving vaccines as they could, at the expense of millions and if not billions of people, especially in the global south. It's like, well, if that's how we respond to a pandemic, how do you think we're going to respond when, fresh water becomes the thing that people are fighting over? We know what's going to happen, right? We know what lies down that path. And so it makes it all the more important to fight to make, fresh water more available, to protect it, to make it accessible to all. Just really wanted to kind of underscore that point because, again, we're not kind of injecting, a political agenda here. We're just trying to describe what the reality in front of us is. And, I want viewers to kind of confront that, to sit with it, to understand it. But I also don't want to leave, us with this sense that everything's terrible, all hope is lost. I mean, where we are sitting, this is worth fighting for.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? The St. Croix River that we saw earlier today. Protecting that is a cause worth fighting for, right? And as you mentioned, folks here in the community have banded together across political lines, cultural lines in really important ways, to stand up for themselves, their neighbors, and their communities. Even with all the barriers, the political and economic barriers, even though y'all are going up against some of the most powerful kind of industries in the world. I wanted to ask if we could kind of round out by focusing on that collective struggle here in Burnett and Polk County.
Yeah, I really have, I've seen just lots of people show up at, we've planned these rallies where we go to the government center and we're outside. And this is pre-COVID, but after COVID, people calling and writing letters. There are quite a few very active folks. There are towns trying to collaborate and see, I think that as much as the politicians are saying, well, there's no way to stop it, this is just what's going to happen, counteracting that are people who have everything to lose, and so they're all in fighting it. Because, and that's been my, for personal reasons, but also the concept of something like this, this is the time to fight, because if you don't fight and you just let it happen, you are accepting that future.